Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Youth Corner Podcast Jeunesse. I'm Emma, and today I'm joined by another very special guest for another episode that I call the Field Day episodes, where we are not in the studio. We're actually recording video and audio remotely. So, once again, same with the previous episode. If you've seen that one, or if this is the first one that you're seeing of this nature, please just bear with us. We know that the audio quality is a little bit different than what we're normally doing in the studio, but I promise that the content of the episode is going to be well worth it. So today I am joined by another person that I know personally. I'm very, very lucky to know this person as well. We have known each other for an absurdly long time. Um, However, we are in very different fields of studies, very different fields of work, and I have always found their work incredibly interesting, and just so much fun to listen to. And I know that it's a field that a lot of young people in the Laurentians think about as well. So, without further ado, I will ask you to introduce yourself by name and your preferred pronouns, and then we're going to get into it.
Sounds good. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Fletcher. My preferred pronouns are they and them.
Wonderful. Okay. So, yes, and it's kind of, I always find it funny when I'm interviewing somebody that I've known for a long time, which has been a couple of episodes of this first season that I'm doing and the fourth season of the podcast overall. Um,
Mhm.
because, we have very in-depth conversations all the time, but not necessarily in like a professional context. But I have heard, clips of you talking professionally before. I have gotten the feedback and whatnot about it. So I know that you're a very good person to be talking about these subjects. So my very first question is going to be about what you're presently doing. So, what is it that you do for school? Where do you go to school? And what are you doing for work?
Well, both coincide really closely, so it's a really great place to start. I am completing my fourth year honors biology degree. That's ending in 2 weeks.
Wow.
Classes end in 2 weeks, which is quite crazy. And that's really great. It's a biology major specializing in environmental studies. And currently, I'm doing my honors thesis, and that coincides with my job. And I'm currently working at the South Shore Watershed Association. And that is located about 30 minutes from Charlottetown. UPEI, University of Prince Edward Island, is located in Charlottetown, the capital of PEI. And Victoria by the Sea is like a good 30 minutes away. Coastal watershed, it's lovely. I handle more of the coastal side of things. My honors project is in partnership with the South Shore Watershed. We call it SWA, and UPEI, where I'm focusing on salt marsh restoration with a focus on nature-based solutions.
That is so cool to hear it said out loud, like in one string as well. It just makes it sound so exciting. Um,
Thank you.
and oh my gosh, that's true. So you're graduating very soon.
May
That's
16th is convocation.
that's crazy. Well, congratulations. It's,
Thank you.
even if I didn't know you as well, I would immediately be able to recognize just how much work has gone into this. So it is very well deserved. Um, so what was it that drew you towards environmental biology? Because it seems like such a broad topic, but I know that there is quite a bit of interest in that field, kind of like the overarching field of environmental studies, in the Laurentians, and especially people who grew up in the Argenteuil regions. We are blessed with having Vanier College's field school right there in Gore, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about 5 minutes from my house, where I grew
Exactly.
up in the Laurentians.
So, and that's one thing that I meant to note right at the beginning as well. You're tuning in from Prince Edward Island, but you were born and raised in the Laurentians as well. And you were from the little community of Gore, which is honestly one of my top three favorite spots in the Laurentians altogether. Um, so did growing up in Gore have any influence in this? Was it kind of completely out of the blue for you? Like what was it that made you decide that you wanted to go into this particular field?
Yeah. It was a journey for sure. Um, to start kind of at the beginning, we did a grade 6 visit to the Vanier College field station. And when I was younger and I didn't really know too much about Cégep or didn't know too much about the city, I thought that was Vanier. So I was so excited. I was like, I'm gonna go to Vanier and be so close to my parents. It's gonna be so nice. Obviously getting a little bit older. No, it's not Vanier. Vanier is a lot bigger. But doing that program and having that learning opportunity, I remember just being so interested in it. It's something that actually really drew my attention. But when, Sec 5 came around and we were looking into different career paths, animal health technology is what actually caught my attention. And ironically, we ended up sharing a break room, the environmental students and animal health tech. So I got to like peek behind the curtain a lot and see what they were doing. And I originally moved to PEI to attend the Atlantic Veterinary College here at UPEI. So that was my first kind of path, and I had the blinders on. I, graduated as an animal health tech. I got registered, so I was an RVT. I did my vet tech national exam, and I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do more than anything. And then I did my pre-vet courses, which involved more biology, and I found, oh, wait, I'm really good at this. And wait, I really like this. And I took zoology with Dr. Pedro Quillon. He's the marine biology professor here at UPEI. I fell in love with it and I took ecology with Dr. Heather Penny, excuse me, as well. And she's the person who encouraged me to go and look into doing my honors in the first place. So big shout out for Heather. Um, and yeah, I switched. I ended up switching out of pre-vet. I did work in the field for 3 years as an RVT, and it's a tough field to be in. I still miss it, and I was good at it, but you can be good at something and have it just not be meant for you, and that's fine. That's okay, right? So I'm graduating fourth year university, and I'm 25 at this point. So I'm a little bit older than my classmates. But it was well worth the wait. It was really what I was meant to do. My parents, growing up in the Laurentians, as we know, it's such a beautiful area. Just aside from the Vanier campus that's out there. So I had that privilege of being raised in such a beautiful spot, and I had parents who advocated for the environment. They taught us about the natural world, taught us that recycling is important, saving energy is important. There was, I think, a David Suzuki Day when I was quite young, where my parents were like, we're going to turn off all the lights and we're going to just, for an hour, we're going to be here, and saw across the lake other people's lights started to go out. And I always just felt very connected to nature and to people in those kinds of moments. And I got to follow it through my career. And I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky I get to do what I do.
Yeah. Well, there is an element of luck to it, most definitely. But there's so much work that you must have put into this as well, too, especially
Yeah.
to have started in animal health and then, and to have been building a career in it as well, and then to have that realization of maybe I was meant for something else. That's a huge deal. And to be able to have the courage to make that jump, um, especially in a university context as well, too, when everything's so expensive and everything feels very um, do or die, for lack of a better term. It's,
Hmm.
you're either doing this or you're not. Uh, it's a very black and white environment when you're in university, and I imagine especially so when you're in STEM fields as well too. So I can definitely see how was that at all a stressful change for you? What was your thought process? What ultimately made you decide to make that change?
Oh my gosh, it was so stressful. It was the most stressful thing I've ever done. Like, moving here was hard and stressful, and getting established in somewhere new. But there was nothing scarier than saying, okay, I've put in 3 years of work in CEGEP, another year's work of prerequisites, then moved here and worked here for, 2 to 3 years. Okay, slay, I'm done now. It was really scary. I have to say, a big proponent of it was being able to access mental health services. It really was a decision that came from just being unwell in that field. I love it and I miss it. My cat gets excellent care as a result. And I have thought about, going back, maybe doing volunteer hours, something like that, because it was something I excelled at. It was something I was good at, but it's something that wasn't good for me. So relying on counseling services at UPEI, and it's not just university institutions. I do want to say CEGEPs also offer mental health services. I feel our high school did as well. We went to LRHS. They also offer mental health services. Um, that was a huge component of it, because your friends might have bias and your parents might have bias, and that's okay because they just want what's, good for you and their point of view. But it's so important to have that third party perspective who has seen hundreds of people before you experiencing the same thing. And that person for me is Kyla Hennessy. Shout out, Kyla. She's so wonderful. She's one of the career counselors at UPEI, and she has seen me from wanting to be a pre-vet student all the way until now. I still see her regularly, because in this field of black and white, she really helps you see the gray, and the gray is terrifying. But it's very worthwhile to see because, it got me to where I am now. So those services helped so much, as well as the support of my family and friends, of course,
Of
you
course.
being one of them in that in that
It's
really large
it's
change.
always been a pleasure.
Um,
Um, well, so what I'm hearing from this is for anybody who's listening, if you are in CEGEP or you're in university or you're planning on going to CEGEP and university, take advantage of the mental health services. You're paying into them for a reason. And it's better to have access to them and not need them than to need them and not have access to them. Um,
I
so,
agree.
and I think that uh, I think a lot of people don't necessarily, and myself included in this too, this has changed over time, but I definitely fall into the or previously fell into the category of people who didn't necessarily recognize career counseling as a mental health service. And if anything, I would argue, and you can and correct me if I'm wrong, as somebody who uses it, it almost strikes me as one of the more important forms of mental health aid that you can get in university because so much of that stress and fear revolves around where am I going? What am I going to do with this? Am I going to survive after graduation? And so on and so forth. But so am I like at all close in in saying
Oh
that,
no, like
or am I
you're
way
on
off?
it.
Okay.
No, you're definitely on the money in that. I found, and I'll recommend career counseling services to people. I TA'd botany and zoology at UPI, and that was one of the first things I would recommend to students if they came and they asked me, like, you're doing your honors. How did you find out about that? How do you feel about that? I want to do this, but I don't know how to feel. Oh, I should have gotten a brand deal with Kyla for how many people I recommend to go see her. And I'm biased, of course. All of the people in the career services at UPI are wonderful. I'm biased just because I've worked with Kyla so much over the last few years. Um, but it really, it really shows you, counseling from that perspective, that nothing is ever in a silo. You can't separate yourself from your work because you are the same person who goes to work and then who comes home from that job. And there's things that intersect, there's things that spill over. It's never perfect. You can never have that strict work-life balance,
Hmm.
There's always going to be a little bit of leakage onto this side and onto the other. So having Kyla's support through that decision-making process of, I think I have to leave this field. I think it's not good for me anymore. Um, More from her side, kind of her presenting that and me being like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about, Kyla. She's so great. It really helped me see that, my work, even being good at it, affected, how I interacted with my friends, how I would spend my off time. If I'm spending the majority of my off time recovering from my work time, like something's wrong. So that was a huge component, working with Kyla. And anytime I recommend, you know, career counseling services to folks, I always say it's not just academic advising. It's not take this class for these credits, get out of my office. It becomes so interpersonal.
Hmm.
Um, I do have a personal counselor, which we love mental health services. And like you said, as long as I'm at UPI, and I'm paying into these services, you bet I'm going to use them. So yes, I have two counselors, and it's great. I get to kind of silo in terms of I get to talk about more of the career side of things and how that's affecting my day to day. And then I have another counselor who I get to talk about, more interpersonal things, mental health issues, et cetera, and how chronic illness and whatnot affects my day to day. So I get to, separate them a little bit. But everything is interconnected. We're not simple beings that can be chopped up into parts.
And I think that, you know, arguing that we should be doing that when it comes to personal life, academic life, work life. I think any time that we are arguing for having a split between all of those, I think we're doing more damage to ourselves. Because you're right, we are the same person that goes to work and goes to school and has a social life. So I'm glad that you talked about that too, because it's
Mhm.
we have a whole episode of this season earlier on in the season where we're talking all about that as well too. And I think it's something that more and more people need to be talking about on a casual level.
Mhm.
It's the kind of thing that people should be, sitting down with their friends, like whether it's for brunch or you're heading to a party or you're just having a relaxed day at a market or something like that. It should become part of the language between friends as well, because I think that there's so much to be said for how much growth you can find in yourself on a personal level, on an academic level, on a working level as well, from how you engage with others as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's a very, very interesting point with everyone that I speak to about it. So moving on, one of the really big questions that I had for you, and this is actually something that even outside of the podcast in our day-to-day friendship, I don't think we've talked a ton about, but it's one that a couple high school students that I've worked with have asked me about, and that I just don't have the proper experience to talk about either. But it's the big move from the Laurentians to PEI. Did you have family or friends or anything like that in PEI when you decided to move?
No, no, I
No.
had
Okay.
I had no one here. It was me, my cat, Freddie Mercury, and my old Volkswagen Golf Bessie, and that is all. Rip Bessie, we miss her so much.
Okay, so you really took the plunge, for lack of a better term.
Yes. During
So
COVID as well, I will
during
add.
COVID, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we got to talk about that a little bit too, because that's I think for a lot of people who grow up out here in the Laurentians, especially if you are English speaking, uh, it's Montreal. That's where you go immediately after
Mm.
high school, or like the greater Montreal area, like the West Island, if you're going to John Abbott or something like that. And that's great. Like Montreal is a wonderful place, especially if you're a student, but you kind of lived that experience and then decided, no. So tell me about that. What made you decide that you were going to apply to the University of Prince Edward Island? Well, actually, no, before that, you said that it was actually the Atlantic Veterinary.
Yes.
Okay.
So to get into the ABC, you have to be a resident or you have to be considered an international student. So because I came from Quebec, my mm, because we came from Quebec, my CEGEP credits did not count. The majority of them did not count.
Oh, no.
That is something to consider on an interprovincial level, which is always why too it's a really good idea to talk to academic advisors if you're thinking about doing the transfer from CEGEP over to a university outside of the province, because outside of Quebec, there's, elementary, middle, high school, university. They
Hmm.
don't do CEGEP. I quite like the CEGEP system, mind you. It's kind of like pre-university. You get to live
Yeah.
on your own for the first time. What is it like to feed myself? What is it like to have to get groceries and be on my own schedule and make my study schedule, and I don't have a parent telling me to do it. and then you get to go to big boy university. But here it is not that experience. So I, at the age of, how old was I suppose, 19 or 20, was right back in first year biology with a bunch of 17-year-olds, and that was a hard pill to swallow, let me tell you.
Oh,
So, moral of
wow.
the story, check your transfer credits. It did work out in my favor, which is why I'm able to graduate this semester and not next semester, are some of those transfer credits. Advocate for yourself is the advice that I would give. Um, that decision was a really tough one. Um, it's a bit difficult to explain. So for I don't want to sum it up to like it was just a feeling, but it was a feeling on one
Yeah.
side. I just felt that restlessness. I'd been in Montreal then for about 4 years, and I just felt that I was ready. I didn't want to go get another apartment in Montreal. I didn't want to keep working the job that I was working in the place where I was working it. I was ready to move on, and I felt that I was ready to move on. And then COVID hit, which obviously made it a little bit more complicated. But my options for vet school in my primary language, being English, the only option in Quebec is Saint Hyacinthe. And the curriculum is in French, to my knowledge. You can take the exams in English. It might have changed now. This was like, back in the day. Um, and that really sucked for me being an Anglophone. I felt quite out of place when I was in Quebec being an Anglophone among a sea of Francophones, especially in Montreal. So I knew I wanted to go out of province, and it
Hmm.
seemed like my best chances were to go to UPEI. But to go to UPEI, you have to be a resident to go to ABC, or you're considered international. So I had to do 2 years of pre-vet and then live here on the island for 1 year without going to school or being a part-time student to be able to qualify. So the hoops to jump through were plentiful, I will say, especially when a lot of my credits didn't transfer over. But I still felt like I was ready for the next step, and it was something I wanted so badly, and I felt that I was ready to move on. I just felt the dread of, I don't want another apartment, and I don't want to get, a different degree, at the time. So I think that's when I knew that I was ready, I suppose.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting take for it too. And I think, you know, that can happen in any city that you're living in. Um, that can happen where you have that moment of thinking, is this it? Is this what it's going to be forever now? Is this where I'm going to stay? And if you're not happy with saying yes to that, then it's time to make a jump. And in your case, it was a big jump as well, too. So you were looking at the long term pretty early on in that case. And not necessarily when I say long term, I don't necessarily mean you had like a specific end goal in mind or anything, because obviously some things changed over those years. But you had a good idea of how long it was going to take, and you seem like you were pretty at peace with that.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay.
Yeah, so pre-vet itself would have been 2 years. And then often folks, unless you have like, the highest GPA in the school, I suppose, um, most folks don't get into ABC on their first try. So then a lot of folks will actually finish their bachelor's degree before they're able to go to ABC. And then ABC in itself, I don't want to say the specific numbers, but more years of schooling. But that's why it's meant for those folks who do want to go all the way.
Hmm.
And I knew I had the capability to go all the way, mind you. My grades are good enough. My GPA is quite high. I don't think I would have had trouble getting into vet school, even like second, third try if I wanted to. If I wanted to now, I could apply and possibly get a very positive result. However, it's not what I want to do because I don't want to necessarily devote the next 5 to 6 years of my life to more schooling to
Hmm.
get to be a vet and be in a field that I don't necessarily want to be in. But do I want to have a PhD in plant ecology? Kinda. And even longer. So,
And it's even longer, but from what you've said so far about what you're doing and what you plan on doing too, it almost seems like not almost seems like it does seem like uh it's going to be worth it in the end.
oh, I'm so excited. Like I was even like, questioning if I wanted to do my master's. But the nice part about an honors is that it gives you an opportunity to try out a research project. How do you feel about the planning, about the communication with different teammates, about gathering your data, analyzing your data, writing your thesis paper, which mine is due in 2 weeks. I feel great about it. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be really good. But it's quite intimidating. So in that experience, I really got to have that firsthand look at research. And I kind of, my supervisor has said this, so I'm not just tooting my own horn. But I'm kind of doing a mini master's because I devised this project on my own. The experimental design I designed on my own. A lot of honors students will work underneath a supervisor in a lab full of people. I'm the only person in my lab. So I did all of the data collecting. I recently actually was just at the Biology and Applied Aquatic Science Conference that's held in Atlantic, Canada. And I was talking with so many different honor students who were talking about their lab and all the people they've met and who they've worked with. And this person's on this component, and this person's on this component. And I'm like, I'm on every component because I don't have a choice. But I love it and I want to continue it. I want to see, I'm so excited to see how the results, pan out when you really get those hard figures going. And I want to be spearheading the research because I feel like I have that critical eye and I feel like I'm good at it and I think I can do good things with it.
hmm
So to me, like the next like 30 years devoted to this, great. That sounds wonderful. I get to devote my life to, science. That's so important right now, especially talking about climate change and how uncertain those things are.
Exactly.
So I feel wonderful. Oh, I have chills. I feel great about it.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that too. And you really are, you have come to this discipline at such a crucial moment as well because of climate change. You know, you are on the front lines of it, being on the Atlantic coast, which notoriously has so many signs of, the devastation of climate change. And we can see it anywhere in any biome. We see it out here in the Laurentians with tornadoes happening in the summers. We've always had violent thunderstorms. When we were children here, it was a normal thing. It was an exciting thing, but they were never devastating. Whereas now we have like almost a tornado every summer that is notable. Um,
Mhm.
we see it in the tick population out here. That's a major problem for us, for domesticated animals, for livestock. Um, there's all these things that when we're out here in the Laurentians and we're talking about it day to day, we know that it's climate change and we're concerned about it, but it becomes part of the everyday vernacular. Whereas when
Mhm.
you're out in the Maritimes, it's a whole other slew of symptoms, essentially. That's what it is. It is symptoms of a greater illness. Um, what you talked about how you work in a watershed, especially in the warmer months as well. What kind of work do you guys do that is either directly or indirectly combating climate change or the effects of climate change, I should say?
Oh, that's so topical. I've been actually hosting presentations in classes. I reached out to some older profs and I asked if it was all right if I presented about watershed work and what watersheds do, because that's how I found out about watershed work. And now I've, kind of turned it into a jumpstart career after graduation. So very topical. I wish I had my PowerPoint. A lot of the work that watersheds do directly go into combating climate change. A lot of us are working on the 2 billion trees project. That
Okay.
is 2 billion, yes, 2 billion trees, which is Canada-wide wanting to plant 2 billion trees, by our target year. Don't quote me on what year it is, but it's not too distant. I want to say maybe 2030. Um, so we're directly a part of that. So any trees that we plant, are added to that sum. That increases the amount of carbon sequestration within our marshes. My specific wheelhouse is monitoring our salt marshes,
Okay.
which are a type of wetland, and they're primarily dominated by perennial grasses. They do an insane amount of carbon sequestration. I forget the exact ratio. I just wrote a paper on this. There's a specific ratio where, like, let's say a dime-sized amount of salt marsh can sequester the same amount of carbon as, like, however many square meters of old growth forest, just because of the way that their biomass like is so much stored underground, right? And how
Yeah.
they like lock away all that carbon. And it's so interesting, which is why I think I became so involved with it. We also, a big part of our work, we focus on stream restoration. You were talking about tornadoes and whatnot at home. Hurricanes are the big thing over here.
That's true. You actually lived through a hurricane a couple years,
Yes,
the one of the big ones as well.
you were the first one to find out when I had power back. I
That's
remember
true.
this so well. Yeah, actually, I turned, what was it? I think I turned 23 during the hurricane. I had no power for 10 days. It was
Wow.
rough out here. Yeah, and I'm not too far from Charlottetown, but all of our power is maintained by Maritime Electric, so infrastructure issues, not a lot of renewable energy, wink wink. So we didn't have power for quite a while. And the streams reflect a lot of that devastation. So much of our forests fell, and it's a natural process of forest succession. But to the scale that we experienced it, along with coastal erosion, is just unprecedented. So we actually focus a lot on coastal erosion as well, and we're planting trees. That's great for in terms of like locking away carbon, but planting these like native trees and shrubs on the coastline also holds that sandstone together, because that's all this island is just a lump of hard sand. So we disintegrate very easily. Coastal erosion is hugely topical right now. It's not a wise decision to be buying any coastal property pretty well anywhere in the Maritimes. I think total we lose about, I want to say, a meter of coastline every year.
That's significant too. That's
It's significant
I
on
remember
average.
being a kid and hearing it, when it was still in the centimeters, and even at that, when it was we were talking about centimeters of coastal erosion every year, that was still considered a big deal and an alarming thing. So for it to now be up to a meter, that's not even writing on the wall anymore. That's the sign is right in front of your face. So
Yeah.
to know that you're doing this research and that there's whole programs of and whole cohorts of people in those programs going out and doing the work that you guys are doing now, it does make things feel a little more reassuring, because it means that the people who know the problems are also the ones going out and trying to fix them. Um, so I think that that's critical. And anybody who's listening to this, if you, for whatever reason, if you've never heard of the terms of coastal erosion, if you've never heard of the effects of salt marshes on carbon, please go and look that up. There's a number of Canadian websites, Government of Canada websites that do an excellent job at describing some of them. Do you know of any other resources that people who maybe might not be in the know could go and take a look at to kind of educate themselves on it?
Definitely try to stick to your trusted sources. So like government websites, even if they're not necessarily Canadian government websites, because a lot of different places in the world are coastal who are also experiencing coastal erosion. So any site that has a .gov, you can usually rely on that to be a trusted source. What would be a good example? WWF is more in terms of like biodiversity, but that is something
That in and of
really
itself is,
reliable,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
to look into if you're interested in just like how climate change affects global biodiversity. Um,
I think a good it would still be under it would still be classified as government sources, but there's a lot of European nations that are doing incredible work on climate change reversal and prevention.
mm,
European, especially Western European government sites, in my experience, have been excellent as well too. Um, so stick to the official sources,
yes, try to
and
stick to the
always be
official
sure
sources.
to ask questions. And if you don't know the answer, find somebody that does.
Yeah,
Um,
checking your sources is always a really good practice. I these more accessible sites that have kind of like the baseline information aren't my wheelhouse at this moment. I am all
Mm-hmm.
over Google Scholar looking for my journal articles and that, but they get quite technical. So if someone's really interested and curious and wants to take a big bite into some good science, I would recommend going on Google Scholar and kind of seeing what you can maybe find with, those keywords, those interesting keywords if you want more information. But if you want to just get involved, I would not start there. It could be really intimidating and it is very technical. So stick to your government sites, stick to your environmental protection sites as well, nonprofit sites as well. If a site is for profit, it's a little bit trickier to know if you can trust that information because if it's a for profit, what are they trying to sell you? So always
Mm-hmm.
be skeptical.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Mhm.
No, and that's a whole other conversation too. That's actually we want to do an episode on the podcast in a future season all about fact checking.
Mm.
And that's extremely pertinent to your work as well too. Because you are in a science field, a science and technology field. But even beyond that, you know, I you from especially from everything you've talked about and how passionately you've talked about it too, when you care so deeply about a matter, you'd be doing yourself a disservice to not be researching about it constantly and to not be reading up on as much as you can about it, because if it interests you, there's always going to be more to learn. And
Mm.
I think you're an excellent example of that too, with your whole academic path so far, from, CEGEP or first stepping foot on the Vanier field school premises and seeing all of that, all the way to now 2 weeks away from graduating with honors in biology, and
Oh
all of the
man.
all the changes that you've gone through since that starting point, and all of the progress that you've made both academically and professionally, but also on a personal level. I hope you feel very fulfilled in all that you've done, because just the way that you've presented it to this episode has been stellar. Um,
Thank you.
we're gonna wrap up pretty shortly. What I really love to do with every guest that I bring in, I always love to ask them to talk about something like a funny anecdote, or like a moment that really stands out to you pertaining to the subject matter. So in your case, whether it was your time in veterinary sciences, whether it's your time now in biology, what is something really good that has stuck with you?
My supervisor is gonna kill me because I have such a good anecdote. Um, and I really love this because, when you're doing an honors, you're talking with these people. My supervisor is Dr. Christian Lacroix. He is so smart, and he was actually an editor on the journal Botany, like not botany of, aquatic plants, botany of this, just botany. So he is the plant person, to talk with. So I was so lucky when I got to do my honors with him. And, when you think about that, I'm not even graduated yet. So when you think on the grand scheme of like, scientific hierarchy, well, who am I? But this story always reminds me to ask questions because you provide a different perspective no matter what kind of background you have. So, one part of my honors study is that we were setting up these quadrats, we call them. So, it's like a 1 meter by 1 meter plot where we have these plants, randomly selected spot. And then over the field season, we noted the grass height, if they were flowering, if they had any presence of sea lettuce, which is the main problem in our estuary of interest. It's a macroalgae that grows in these large sheets. And it's a problem because if you tear a sheet, now you have two. If you tear it again, now you have four. So you can have these itty bitty pieces and they'll just keep growing. Then they'll all die off.
Oh
The
boy.
bacteria will take all the oxygen out of the water, and then you have what's called an anoxic event. So we were monitoring these quadrats to see, something called phenology, which is the change in a normal growing season of just like a plant. We call it in situ, right? So we placed this quadrat in our particular marsh of interest, and we placed them in three other marshes. So this particular quadrat in Disable Estuary was growing so great. The tillers, which is the above ground biomass, the blades of grass, they're called tillers. They were growing so well. I was so thrilled. I was telling everyone, like, the disabled tillers are so big, you guys. Like, look at these pictures. And then around July, or maybe June, mid-June, I look down and I look a little closer to the water's edge, and my grass of interest is a pioneer species. It is the first one. You have water and you have my grass. So why was my grass in the quadrant here? And then there was different grass here. And
Oh
then there was the
no.
water. And I took a pause and I looked over there. And then I looked over here and it was June. And I was like, is that flowering? And my grass of interest flowers in September. So I paused and I'm like, this is the wrong grass. So I had been recording the height, the measurements,
Oh no.
everything for a good month and a half on the wrong grass. And this was the grass that my supervisor helped us identify. And it was such a valuable lesson of it doesn't matter at like what stage you are in science, you're always going to make a mistake, but it's always so important to trust your gut, look around at your ecology, ask critical questions, even if you feel like it's not smart or maybe it's not good enough, because I did wonder. I'm not saying I knew before anyone else knew, because I was right there with him, like, this is the grass. But I did pause and go, well, this is the grass, then what's that bundle of dead branches over there that hasn't sprouted yet? So ask good questions, trust your gut. It doesn't matter at what stage you're at, you have important questions to ask.
Excellent. And everybody makes mistakes, and oftentimes those mistakes are hilarious. Even if it doesn't
It
seem
was
like they're
so
going to
funny.
be, they're going to be funny.
We got such great data after on my graph. You just see this nice fat gap at the beginning for that particular marsh. Of course, our marsh of interest as well, but the data is totally fine. And this is something that's a lot more common than people think, because even sometimes between species, it's the smallest difference between them, and you realize you've been watching the wrong bird for 2 years or something like that. It's very common.
I believe it. I believe it entirely.
Mhm.
So, if anybody was wondering, the silly mistakes exist in every discipline, whether it's STEM, whether it's social sciences, whether it's kinesiology or medical sciences. The silly mistakes are always going to be there, so you might as well laugh about them.
There's no sense not laughing about it. The data you have is the data you got, and you just work with it. And if you can't laugh at it, then you're going to be sad a lot of the time because nothing
Yeah,
ever goes to plan in science.
it truly, truly. Um, that I feel like that could just be a quote for life in general as well too.
Very true.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up. So Fletcher, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'm so glad that we got it to work out. Um, Congratulations on everything. Congratulations on
Thank
your
you.
graduation. I'm so excited for when that day finally comes as
Mhm.
well. You're doing really important work out on the East Coast right now. I hope that there are people listening to this podcast who maybe have considered going into biology, environmental sciences, what have you, but maybe feel like they don't want to be doing it here in the Laurentians, or they don't want to be studying in Montreal. There is a whole country and a whole world with many different biomes for you to be going out and studying these things in. So keep your head down, keep going, and you're going to find what you need. So once again, Fletcher, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you
Thank you
for
for being,
having me.
thank you for joining us on Youth Corner. And I will see and be speaking to you guys in the next one. Thank you so much. Thanks, guys.